Hey everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back for the 177th Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. We have got, as always, a wonderful gathering to deal with today. We have 18 people, which is a magic number going on up. And we're going to start the 2 hours today with the great Jerry Ashton, who has retired. Jerry, you can give us the number. God knows how much medical debt, and got a new focus on veterans, which is a very big deal. And we're going to take up all the time you need, Jerry, to talk about that today, because it's something that we can immediately accomplish and absolutely changes people's lives. It's a fantastic thing. We're then going to talk. We're going to try and give everybody a chance to talk in the second half hour of the first hour today. We've had an exercise where we just let people raise the issue that means the most to them right now and that we should discuss. We also have a lot to talk about in terms of the energy picture in California and the all-out assault on renewable energy. It's truly astounding. Gavin Newsom is about to go meet the Pope and hopefully ask forgiveness for his incredible hypocrisy on nuclear power and energy in general. Second hour, starting at 6 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock Pacific, we're going to have Ray McClendon come on. There is, and as you know, a tsunami of anti-voting rights legislation coming down the pike and actually being put into law all over the country. Ray is a major leader, along with Andrea Miller, on protecting the ability of people to vote. We've made some great strides, phenomenal stuff in Arizona, which we talked about last week in terms of hand-marked, hand-counted, digitally scanned paper ballots, which is the way elections need to be conducted. And but unfortunately, we're having a simultaneous assault on the right to vote all over the country, which Ray McClendon has been working with, especially in Georgia, but in other ways as well. So the second hour is going to be a real deep dive on protecting the vote. We are going to record that and make it part of the guidebook that we're working on, which will hopefully be ready in a couple weeks. Green Grassroots Election Protection Guide, so that we can have a decent election this fall. And it's really looking, it's going to be, the fate of the earth is in our hands here. And this is crunch time for the human race, as far as I think we all are well aware. Camilla Reese has certainly been working on that. And we have Tatanka Bricka, that just conducted one of the best KPFK LSBs we've ever had. That's LSB, Local Station Board, not the other LSD. But we actually have decent progress to report on the Pacifica Radio Network. I think we're actually moving ahead to save that incredible asset. But let's talk about today's asset, the Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition. This is our fifth year, amazingly enough, the 177th meeting. We've had Jerry Ashton on with us before, truly astounding and productive sessions with Jerry. Jerry, you've introduced yourself to us before, but it's been a while since you've been on. Can you basically tell us your amazing background, how you decided to start this campaign, where the campaign is at right now, and what we can do to deal with, each one of us, to deal with retiring medical debt?
Well, it's bigger than ever.
Yeah, it's astounding.
It's really
But
bigger than ever.
start by giving us the numbers. How much medical debt have you? Basically, the situation is this. Let me see if I get it. That the people can't pay their medical debts. They get hit with bill collectors. You go in and you pay off at a fraction of the dollar these excessive medical debts, and people are freed. Is that like a decent thumbnail sketch of what you do?
That's pretty close. What happens is that when you and I are caught up in the American uh, medical so-called system, um, inevitably some of us are going to end up owing more than we have in our pocketbooks or bank accounts or what have you. And yes, people do end up in collections. Hospitals, doctors send people to collections and pursue the debt. If it isn't collected by a collection agency, they then try a second agency, which will be a little bit more aggressive. If that doesn't work, then they'll turn to what they call debt sellers and debt buyers. A debt buyer will go to a hospital and say, I see that you have, oh, let me see, $50 million worth of uncollected bills there. I happen to have a couple $1 million rattling in my pocket. Maybe we can make a trade. And so the good hospital responsible in a fiduciary capacity and needing to squeeze every dime that it can get out of the bottom down to the bottom line, they will sell that debt. Your debt, which might be $100, they'll sell it for maybe 3 pennies on the dollar. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means you and I, our debt is bought and sold on the open market like ham hocks, futures, and anything else that you can make a buck off of. But when people buy our debt, they buy it for pennies, but when they decide to collect on it, it's for 100 pennies on the dollar. That's called a scam as far as I'm concerned. These are bottom feeders. So what did I do? As a former debt collector and a former Navy journalist, I wandered into Occupy Wall Street a few years ago, about 12 to be exact, and 2011, really 13. And I got caught up and resonated to the complaints that were being voiced there. One of them was that medical debt should not exist in a society. Medical debt should not put people into bankruptcy. Medical debt should not cause us to lose our homes. And that resonated with me because we're the only industrial nation that will allow our populace to be treated in such a fashion. So, with a partner of mine by the name of Craig Antico, who worked with me in the collections industry, we started a charity called RIP Medical Debt in 2014, January. We are celebrating its 10th birthday this coming week, and we will be announcing that we have abolished close to $12 billion
My God.
worth of medical debt for close to 8 million Americans.
Oh my God. That's astounding. $12 billion and 8 million people that you've freed from medical debt?
Yep.
Don't these hospitals get tired of seeing you coming around?
Well, we started working the system ourselves. And what we did is we petitioned the Health and Human Services, the Office of the Inspector General, and we said, look you're letting these collection agencies buy medical debt from hospitals and then chase it down. Why don't you allow us as a charity? And by the way, RIP Medical Debt has changed its name now to UNDUE, UNDUE Medical Debt. Marketing, branding. But now what we did is we got permission to go directly to hospitals ourselves. And if you take a look at what's in our pipeline and the way that cities and states are very cleverly using the dollars that were not spent during COVID, we're going to free in New York City alone 1 million New Yorkers who owe $2 billion, and that's in the pipeline. So that's what's happening.
Wow. Well, UNDUE, is that what you're going to be? UNDUE?
Yes, UNDUE, UNDUE, medicaldebt.org. I am on the board of that charity. I retired to the board a couple of years ago in order to be able to work on a different front, and that's veterans. When you're ready to talk about that, I'll tell you what we're doing there.
Well, let's jump right in. What's the deal with veterans? And then people, I mean, this is a complicated deal. I want to ask you, you must have repeat people who, get free of medical debt, but then build up more. And also, are you a 501c3? Are donations to your organization tax deductible?
Yes. This is undue medical debt. See where it says erase medical debt? If you scroll down a little bit, that's how much money we're at right now. 11,857,000,000. Okay.
Wow, amazing.
Now, see how we want to work together to fix the broken healthcare finance system. So my charity has gotten very sophisticated, and we're going upstream now. Instead of just sweeping up after the parade, we're doing our best to influence legislators, policymakers, what have you, to change the rules of the game so that people don't get abused as they are right now. Now, if you go into the search engine, not search, but if you go into the put up endveterandebt.org, yes, no, not within the site. They won't show you us there. You have to go up above to get that. There we go. Endveterandebt.org. There we are. And that's what we're asking people to do, is throw veterans a lifeline. You may not know it, but our veterans probably have even worse attention paid to them than insurance companies pay you and me. In fact, the VA hospital system has $6 billion worth of medical debt owed by veterans through their system. $6 billion.
Oh, to the VA? The VA charges these guys?
It's owed through the VA. What the VA does is when a veteran gets run over, taken by ambulance to a hospital, they submit the ambulance bill and the hospital bill to the VA, and the VA summarily rejects it. That's just how it's done. I'm a veteran. I know what I'm talking about. How do they get away with that? Because healthcare in the VA is dispensed based on who you are, where you served, what your rate is, were you exposed to toxic chemicals, are you part of Agent Orange, and all these things that they determine whether or not you qualify for that bill. And for example, there's one veteran I was working with, he had a heart attack in a civilian hospital and was being pulled into the surgery room. And they said, "Oh, you're a veteran, we better call the VA." They called the VA, and the VA says, "Well, we'll send an ambulance."
Oh my God.
I mean, that's how insane it is. We'll send an ambulance. This is on the East Coast in the DC area. The VA hospital was 60 miles away from where this guy was suffering a heart attack. And so he turned down the invitation to go to the VA. And because he turned down the VA, they rejected the hospital bill.
So was he personally responsible for the hospital bill?
Yes. It's at the discretion of the government as to whether or not you and I, as veterans, qualify for medical care.
Oh my God. So, and what happened to this guy? Did he go bankrupt? I mean, do you know, did you follow his financial career?
Yeah, I covered him in a chapter of the book I co-wrote called End Medical Debt. Let's see.
Yeah. And what happened to the guy?
Well, he is in chapter 5, which the chapter title is "No Thank You for Your Service." And I covered him and I wrote about him and I said, this is all the thing that's happening to him. He did not go bankrupt, but he used $30,000 of his life savings to pay it down, and he still ended up in collection, pursued by collection agencies. So what I'm doing right now, I hope, is not delivering anything other than information that needs to be acted on. I'm not anti-VA. I use the VA services, but I know, and all the veterans know, that in too many cases, the VA will just stall you. They won't pay in time, and that destroys any possibility for a veteran to get out from underneath debt when things like that happen.
Oh my God. Steve, did you want to say something, Steve Caruso?
Yeah.
Steve, yeah.
It just goes to show how privatization has taken over the whole American system. There's no stopping the monopolies, how much gouging. I mean, you're like the anti-Paul Singer who would buy the medical debt, or not the medical, but any country's debt, and then turn around and just charge them full rate. Definitely a sign that things are a little bit askew in terms of benefiting the common good for the people, and that we really need to go to single payer and erase all this stuff. I laud your work. You're doing great work, Jerry, and I think that just shows you what we all need to do and strive to achieve in the future.
Well, thank you. You know, the VA could be considered a prototype of a single payer system. If the VA were run exactly as a single payer should be run, and getting rid of the insurance aspect of it, this would be the type of thing that could be a template for what we would call single payer systems right now. It's just that whenever you get people involved and you give them control and territory, all too often it's abused. That doesn't mean that it's always abused, but when it does, it becomes just horribly painful for people that are at the butt end of it. So thank you. So what I'm doing now is I'm asking people to donate to endveterandebt.org, because
And you are a nonprofit.
we're a 501c3
Right. Okay.
nonprofit, and we're a 501c3 foundation, charitable foundation, which means we can work with foundation charities like yours, for sure. Anybody else a charity, we'd love to partner with them, because here's the big news. On June 6th, we are going to launch a nationwide campaign that I'm begging you folks to help me with. The campaign is going to take place on June 6th. Does that date ring any bells for anybody here?
D-Day.
D-Day.
The Omaha Beach, the invasion of the liberation of mainland Europe.
That's right. Liberation is a great term to use. It was by the Allies. They landed in Normandy 80 years ago on June 6th. That's coming up. 80 years ago. We are launching what we call Debt Day, in which we are going to bring to America's attention that the things that our veterans from World War II did not imagine happens to veterans returning today, ending up with no jobs, homeless, PTSD, heavy drugs. I mean, I could go down through the litany of all the abasement that's done to our veterans, but I won't go into that. The important thing is that the veterans of today are deeply in debt, to the extent that this is what leads to suicidal ideation and suicide, the act itself. How do I know this? Because this is a social determinant. Debt is a social determinant that leads to outcomes that you and I do not want to see happen.
Wow.
So we're declaring it as Debt Day, and we're going to combine ourselves with other charities and organizations and individuals who donate to us. We are going to abolish $1 billion of the veteran debt for each year that has passed since 1944. That means $80 million. Now, so you'll understand the numbers. What does it take to go out and buy veteran debt? 3 pennies on the dollar, which means that $30,000 will buy $1 million worth of veteran debt, payday loan debt, car note debt, all the fake universities and schools that scammed veterans out of the GI Bill, that debt. That's what we're
Wow. Fantastic. Myla Reason's got a hand. Myla and then Camilla.
Thank you, Jerry, so much for this extraordinary project.
Thank
I have a question, but I just wanted to say that I remember many years ago hearing that more Vietnam veterans had committed suicide than soldiers who had died in the Vietnam War, US soldiers. And you just have to understand that you know, you've got the PTSD and all of the horrors of war combined with this crushing debt. It's just outrageous. And I'm wondering, what are the armed services committees of our national government doing about this? And have you approached those committees? And it just seems like this is something that the US government should be paying attention to.
Thank you for that question, Mila. And here are the answers. 44 veterans a day will commit suicide.
Oh my God.
The VA, their statistics show that it's only 22 per day. You and I both know that 1 a day is too much. But the government, in its attempts to try to deal with this horrible problem, and considering that suicide has so many conditions that lead to that, and what they did is 2 years ago, they did a campaign called Mission Daybreak. And the government put up $20 million for organizations that would have an innovative way to reduce veteran suicide. Now, sound pretty good so far? There were 1,371 organizations, including mine, that put in a solution. Out of 1,371 people who offered solutions to reduce veteran suicide, only 40 were selected. 40. Now, you know damn well with the law of averages, there's got to be more than 40 organizations that could do a damn good job of eliminating veteran suicide. So I'll tell you the kind of hooks that are there. First of all, the 40 organizations that got the money, many of them were the usual suspects, the people that the VA had already done some work with. Secondly, they made sure, this is my conjecture, not blaming them, they made sure that they look good. Because what we did with what I created prior to End Veteran Debt is, let's rethink this. That was the name of my public benefit corporation. Let's rethink this. And I said to the VA, here's my offer. I will see to it that if you allow the VA to make available its $6 billion for the medical debt, I would see to it that it would be abolished. Now, can you imagine the freedom that veterans would feel with $6 billion of the debt lifted off their backs? Do you think that some of them would probably not want to pull the trigger, having learned some pretty good news in that vein? So I knew that was going to happen, because what happened is, if we did that, it would show that the VA was the bad guys because they'd run up all this debt. Nobody wants to look bad. Nobody wants to look bad. Everybody
Oh,
wants to
I don't mind. I mean, look at my hair. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
But you worked hard to earn that, Harvey.
And the VA.
Oh, Myla, you got muted.
You got muted, Myla.
Yeah, anyway, I'm just saying that the VA does not look good here, nor does the United States government at this point, not taking care of the veterans. In fact, driving them to suicide because of this ridiculous system.
Yes.
Let's hear from Camilla Reese. Camilla.
Thank you. Yes,
I'd like to take as
thank
many
you.
questions as possible. I put my email in the chat box, by the way, for those of you who want to write me. So
Go
who has
ahead,
a question?
Camilla.
Okay, thank
Sure.
you. Yes, so I'm trying to get my head around the economics of how you can buy debt for 3 cents on the dollar. What is it in for the hospitals?
What's in it for the hospital is something rather than nothing. If I'm given $3 million for $100 million worth of medical debt that I can't collect, that's sitting on my books. I've already gone through collections, 2 collections. I've sent out invoices. Nobody's paying me. So when somebody comes along with $3 million to buy what is worthless to me, that's a pretty good decision.
That's really shocking. So people can donate to your nonprofit to enable you to buy the debt from not just the veterans, but other people as well.
Exactly.
And they get their tax deduction for donating
Yes.
to your 501c3.
That's
Okay.
correct. Yep.
Yeah, I got it. And I certainly really appreciate your point about the veterans system being an example of a single payer system that doesn't work very well, and it's so that's not the
And
only
we're paying. And we're the ones paying.
Yeah, that's not the only answer. I'm actually working on some writing right now and what the other part of the answer is. But anyway, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary O'Connor, I think, has raised his hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary. Camilla, thank you. Gary, go ahead. Gary, are you unmuted? All right. Try and unmute Gary here. This is the one little loggerhead that we run into. Oh, there we go. All right, go ahead, Gary.
I heard Carrie Harrison on KPFK just a month or 2 ago with a very good program on medical debt. Are you associated with him? He was very enthusiastic, impressive.
No, Kerry is a good friend of mine, and I worked with him early on to bring attention to veterans. And we had created a show called, what was that called? Rethinking Heroes.
Yeah.
That's right. Rethinking Heroes. And he went on to do other things, and I'm going to circle back to him because what we're doing is just a natural, just like it would be for you to talk to us about what we're doing for veterans. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we got Paul Newman. Paul Newman in LA.
Hi, I just wanted to say that things are really getting bad with their hedge funds and all these other Wall Street organizations that are buying hospitals, buying doctors, and creating firms and making healthcare far more expensive and prohibited.
Yeah.
And I find this to be rather interesting. And it just seems to be snowballing out of control now. And I mean, it's insane. So debt may be even going up more. And the ability on collection may change, because they have their thumbs in politicians' wallets, and donations and lobbying and everything.
I can give you some good news there. I'm good friends with the CFPB. And keep in mind, I'm a former
Wait, what's the CFPB?
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. These are the ones that make sure that you and I aren't screwed over by the usual unscrupulous vendors, corporations, organizations, and they watch over the collection agencies as well to be sure that they don't abuse their rightful business work that they do.
But I have a question though. I noticed that when the people can't afford to pay bills, there are organizations that will find a way of financing it. But it seems that these organizations also are supporting private organizations where they can get money through this. You know what I'm saying? They're
Yes.
using the federal government to drain it, in other words.
Yes. I just saw a
Like
note.
Obamacare.
I just saw a note on the screen about the Debt Collective. Whoever's interested in that, let me tell you a background of the Debt Collective. When Occupy Wall Street was in action, I joined various groups,
Mhm.
student debt, media outreach, alternate banking, and when I was courted by Occupy to be their back office to help them go buy debt so that they could forgive it to get some publicity. And I was also writing at the time for the Huffington Post, so I made sure that I got some publicity for them as well. We worked with them, Craig Antico and I, for about almost 2 years, when they came up to us one day and said, and this, by the way, was under the name that they had called the Rolling Jubilee. The Rolling Jubilee.
I know Jubilee.
Yep. And that's a good
Forgiving
thing.
debt.
It's a wonderful, historic, wonderful thing. So we were working with them, and then they came up one day when Occupy was beginning to dissipate and we were being kicked out of the park. They came up to us and they said, well, we're shutting down the Rolling Jubilee because we're going in a different direction. Well, that's okay. I was giving my work for free, and Craig was being paid to do the work that you need to do to buy and send out the letters and stuff like that. But we looked at each other and we said, we can't let this happen. We were hooked to be able to take people out of medical debt. So that's when we decided to start RIP Medical Debt. And then we discovered that our friends had gone after student debt. And so they created what they call the Debt Collective. And the Debt Collective has done a damn good job of getting student debt abolished. I admire those folks, but they don't talk to me anymore. I don't know why it is. You know how people get into their little silos.
But what does that have to do with getting money out of? In other words, there's these programs where money is being drained from public to private using using financial aid, but it's the government that's paying for you, and it's going to a private organization.
Well, let me try to be more direct in my answer. What you're talking about, financial aid, one is you can get a credit card, a medical credit card. Well, never put medical debt on a credit card to begin with. Never, because you can never identify it as being medical debt anymore. It goes along with your big screen TV and buying that new pair of shoes. Never put medical debt on a credit card if you can help it. So the bankers, Wall Street, figured out a great way to help you pay your bill to the hospital as they, with the hospital, pushed a credit card that people could apply for so that the hospital's debt would be on the credit card's debt, which of course meant that the hospital took a haircut. But now these people had all this debt, chasing it down for their exorbitant interest rates. Does that help?
Yeah.
This is Carla in Minnesota. I have a question.
Yes, Carla, go ahead.
Carla.
Okay. I am on several 501c3s in Minnesota, and we're getting money, but we have administrative fees. Are you doing all this for free, or how is this working with you? I mean,
Thank you.
how are you getting paid? Are you getting paid? Who's doing all the work?
Let me tell you. When I started RIP Medical Debt, it took me 2 years maxing out my credit cards, friends and family, the whole disaster, until finally I built RIP Medical Debt up so that I could be paid some money. And yes, I was paid nicely, 10 grand a month, $120,000 a year. And I still chose to retire to the board with no money in order to start in veteran debt to run myself again in debt up to my ears, credit cards maxed. Why would anybody do that? Because they're crazy. So the reason I did that is because I know that enough people will show up and care about veterans that they will give us large sums of money. And as a foundation, we can use this money to feed other charities. That's the difference. Rather than being just a charity, I'm a charitable foundation. I can accept donations, which is tax deductible, and I can give away that money, and as long as it's part of a veteran scheme. Does that help? Mike Hirsch?
So does the organization cover your psychiatric bills for having been so crazy? Okay.
I wish.
Mike Hirsch, go ahead, Mike, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Jerry, you're such an inspiration. The work that you're doing is so tremendous. And it's just great to hear all the bankers screaming and crying when you're doing the same thing to them that they do to all of us. I just
Yep.
want to underscore the Veterans Administration is by and large a very good organization. The problem has been it hasn't been funded properly. And especially since we're nonpartisan, but we can discuss history. W. Bush got us into 2 wars at once. Meanwhile, he was slashing taxes on a lot of people, including those big banks that are now screwing us over.
Yep.
And he did not fund the VA. And it's partially maybe because he's a coward who skipped out of Vietnam, even though he supported the war, claimed that he had bunions or Lord knows what it was that kept him out.
It's because he's a Republican and a capitalist.
Well,
That's good.
we're nonpartisan, but there are some
Okay.
Democrats who are also
There's equal
cheapskates when it
opportunity.
comes
Yeah,
to.
there's equal opportunity for everybody to be a sinner here. But
That's right.
we'd like to forgive the ones who want to expiate their sins by making sure that you do fund the VA.
That's
And
right.
The VA
And
can only
yep,
help you to the extent that it has enough doctors, it has
that's
enough
right.
supplies, what have you.
That's right. And to their credit, Bernie Sanders and the late John McCain worked together to do as much as they could to help our veterans out. But there's never enough that we can do for our veterans. A lot of them have been kind of hornswoggled into serving our country. A lot of them do it out of pride in the country and a sense of commitment to the country. A lot of them do it because of the poverty draft. That's a whole other thing. But when they come out, especially if they've seen combat, but it doesn't really matter if they've served stateside or wherever they've served, they have served this country and they deserve our respect, and more than our respect, more than, all this, parades and whatnot. They need to have their bills paid. They shouldn't be left hanging. They shouldn't be left homeless. They shouldn't be left emotionally devastated. They shouldn't be left burdened with healthcare debt. And Jerry, thank you again so much for everything that you're doing to pay our veterans back that debt that they've paid for our country.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. I do want to call attention to one senator and a guy who worked with him who did tremendous things for the veterans, and that was John Glenn, who was a senator from Ohio. And I recalled that I worked with a guy. He was a co-author of our book, Killing Our Own. I'm going to have him on in the near future, and you should come on with him, Jerry. Bob Alvarez. Bob did the first citizens' hearings on radiation health impacts, and he also was responsible for the hearings that were in Congress on Agent Orange. And as you know, the U.S. military denied up and down for years and years and years that Agent Orange had any impact on the health of the veterans there and that went to Vietnam. And a lot of the guys who really suffered after the Vietnam War, we talk about the suicide rate among PTSD veterans. Agent Orange really did a number on our veterans, and it was a total denial on the part of the government that Agent Orange had any impact. So,
yeah, this is where I get very upset about the government end of it. I can understand lobbyists paying people a lot of money to make sure that a bill goes in a certain directions. But how is it that, for example, with burn pits, which is the latest fight that veterans have had with the VA, they would not acknowledge that burn pits created cancers in our servicemen and women. And if it wasn't for, who's that? John Stewart. He's the patron
John Stewart, right?
He's a patron saint for veterans because he finally helped get it over the line to be able to see that veterans were going to be treated for everything that comes out of burn pits. All the disease.
Yeah, and isn't Biden's son wasn't he harmed by cancer from a burn pit Isn't
I
that
think-
part of the story?
So that's part of the story. Mhm.
Yes. Well, Jerry Ashton, you're a true hero. It's really great to have you on with. Of course, then there's a question of the cycle of when is this cycle of our medical system that kills people with debt going to end? Let's go to Camille. Camille, I hope you'll recognize this T-shirt I'm wearing. Go ahead, please. Camilla Reese.
Yeah.
Yeah, but-
Hi. Okay, so what I'm trying to understand is it's wonderful that you can buy the debt at a discount and you get donors to your nonprofit to underwrite it and relieve the veterans or the people of their medical debt. That's wonderful. But is there any potential recourse back to the government in the case of the veterans for exactly this situation that they don't pay the bills, they transfer people an hour away when they're having a heart attack, all these different things that is there any recourse, any legal recourse back to the government?
There's always legal recourse. The only question is, do people have the time and the money and the resources to pull that off? And one of the values of charities and veteran supporters of banding together is that there's enough money available to be able to do that, Kamala.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, and nothing catches the attention more of the VA than a letter written to your local congressman or woman. And I was recently worked with an organization called ResistBot. I'm sure some of you must be familiar with ResistBot. If not, I want to refer you on to it because for a small fee, they came out of, with a name like a ResistBot, you can tell they're exactly what their attitude is about things. They want to see things change. And so they've set up some very clever letter writing campaigns that can be done by going to their website. That'd be resistbot.com, I think. And you can do a campaign. And that campaign will, with a small amount of money, will send letters to your legislators. And that gets a lot more attention than the phone calls that, as you know, you end up in voicemail. I recommend
Wow,
it.
that's interesting. So this organization, ResistBot, tell us how it works. I'm not exactly clear. And then we'll get to Lynn Feinerman. Lynn has a hand.
Well, yes, ResistBot. We're going to be using them in our campaign. Now, by the way, this campaign, $30,000 gets rid of $1 million of the veteran debt. We don't have to do it all at once, but on June 6th, it would be nice that enough of us got together to come up with at least $1 million of the debt to blast this thing off. So I'm just putting that in your think tank. Now, that made me forget the original question.
ResistBot, I'd like, if you can get us someone or get us contacted with them, we can bring them on.
I'd
So
love to be happy to
I
take
would like to hear more about ResistBot. Why don't we go to Lynn Feinerman? Lynn's a great guest. She's a radio host in Northern California. Lynn, go ahead.
Thank you, Harvey. And thank you, Jerry. The work is just fantastic and so much deserved by those who serve. My question is very specific. As regards recourse back to the government, there are new bills that have been passed recently that strongly curtail class action suits. How does that affect a thing like what you're talking about going back to the government?
Well, I'm not sure about the blanket inability for us as citizens or veterans to do a class action suit. I don't know enough about that. What I can tell you is that when veterans band together and veteran supporters like yourselves who say, let's right this wrong, and we create a campaign, and the campaign is what gets the attention of the legislators, along with a writing campaign. And Harvey, I will be happy to introduce you to ResistBot's
Yeah, please. Absolutely.
people. So, Lynn, I'm sorry to say I don't have enough details on that, but I can do some research.
All right. So, and I am glad to hear, things like Occupy Wall Street. you know, we have these demonstrations that occur, and then they fade away. And you know, Occupy Wall Street, we got the 99% thing out of it, and they fade away, and you wonder if anything ever came of it. And here we hear that what you know that this incredible organization that you do, this incredible campaign that you do, came out of Occupy Wall Street. I'm
did.
really glad to hear that. You know,
And
I'll tell you two things. I've worked for decades with a guy named Kevin Camps in the anti-nuclear movement. This is a story to just make you understand that everything you do has an impact. So I used to go around the country speaking in you know, churches and basements and stuff like that. And you always wonder. I would show up. I would travel, you know, 500 miles and speak to 6 people, and you always wonder what the heck are you doing? So I had this guy Kevin Camps, a wonderful guy. He's been on our talks. I was riding around. I worked with him for a long time. I was riding around in a car, and I asked him how he got involved in the anti-nuclear movement. And he gave me a really funny look, and he said, "Well, you got me involved. I heard that you speak at Kalamazoo. I kind of remember I spoke to like, you know, 4 people in a basement, but I guess one of them was Kevin. And so, you know, what you're doing is just has an enormous impact. It leads to my greatest story. This is my favorite story about activism. I once I spoke at Ohio Wesleyan with Jeremy Rifkin. Jeremy Rifkin's a very, very well-known futurist and draws huge crowds wherever he goes. But I was telling him, we were talking about the perils of the road. And I told him I once flew from Miami to Duluth and I spoke to 5 people. And he said, well, he wouldn't fly for a long time. He said he took a train from DC to Denver and spoke to 2 people. And then he said, but you know, you got to give the whole speech because you never know if one of them might be Gandhi. And I later heard a story that Bertrand Russell, and I think I told this on that, Bertrand Russell actually called a giant peace march to convene in Trafalgar Square in London. And he did all this publicity, and one person showed up, but it was Gandhi. So, you know, because Gandhi was in law school in London, and he showed up. So there you go. So the other thing is, and this is going to sound far afield, but I spoke actually once in Russia. It was on the 10th anniversary of Chernobyl, and I had been to a conference in Kiev, and which was incredibly depressing. You know, talking to people who had been harmed by the fallout from Chernobyl, and then I was introduced in Kaliningrad. It was the weirdest experience I ever had giving a speech. They called the thing, I was representing Greenpeace, and they called a rally, and there were like 100 people at the rally. It was a really cool rally. And all of a sudden, the military marches up. These guys were in Russian uniforms, and they pull out their guns, their rifles. And I said, oh God, we're cooked. And they lifted their rifles in the air and they gave me a 21 gun salute. And it turned out, and this is complicated, but it's really worth hearing. During Chernobyl, in the worst of the accident, the Soviets, and they had a drafty army, and they sent these guys, they sent 600,000. I thought when I first saw that, I thought this was a typo. The Soviet military sent 600,000 soldiers, draftees, into Chernobyl, into the power plant, to run in for 90 seconds, allegedly, and like throw a brick off a roof and run out. They had to clean up the place, but it was too radioactive. And they sent these guys in. And the guys later, you know, years later this was 10 years later, I was talking to them, became 20-somethings and 30-somethings. And they all got cancer. I mean, the cancer rate, they were called liquidators, right? That was the term that was used, liquidators. And they had a horrendous cancer rate, like our guys from Vietnam. And I remember during and after the war in Vietnam, the fiercest group that we worked with, and Tatanka, I'm sure, remember, and other people who organized, the fiercest group that we had against the war was the Vietnam vets against the war. They were absolutely ferocious. I mean, incredibly angry. They were all dying from Agent Orange and PTSD, enormous suicide rate. So when I was in Kaliningrad, the reason, and the rally we gave, we had the mayor and the governor there. And this was just as the Soviet Union was, gone. These guys had all been liquidators in Chernobyl, and they had grown up and they took over the government in Kaliningrad. And they're the reason the Soviet Union fell. And, you have to and interviewing these guys was one of the most moving experiences of my life. Just talking to these guys their lives have been ruined by 90 seconds in Chernobyl. And in fact, if you go, and I highly recommend, there's an HBO series. It's a 5-part series on Chernobyl. And they do have, a portrayal of what these guys went through. They show people, it's a simulation, it's dramatized, but they show these guys going in there, running in and running out, which is what happens to the liquidators. And they're the ones who brought down the Soviet Union. They really did, these guys. And then you have to wonder what happened to their, in the medical system in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union to deal with all these guys dying of cancer. And I'll bet you they got zero care of any meaning. And who knows what, the system was for medical bills. But it really resonates. So I strongly recommend, everybody I've talked to on the nuclear issue, but if you're at all interested in the worst thing that probably ever happened to veterans, look at the segment in the HBO series on Chernobyl. It's mind-boggling what these guys were put through. And that you're talking about 600,000 people, an enormous chunk of the world's population that was just exposed at Chernobyl. And you have to, God knows, wonder what happened to them medically, and then if they had debt, and how that impacted everything. So there you go. Mike Hirsch, please.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Sluggo. And it just strikes me how everybody cheers our men and women off to war, but then when they come home, nobody wants to know them. Nobody but Jerry and the people on this Zoom. And I hope that's enough. And I think that we're doing great things here. And Sluggo, thank you for pointing out that, people in uniform are treated, like dog food by people, by the so-called leaders all around the country. It's a terrible thing. And it's one more reason why all of us demand peace and diplomacy as opposed to this warfare, which too often, in my opinion, is nothing but a money laundering scheme for the military-industrial complex. But I didn't come up with that. Certain former general named Eisenhower brought that up a number of times, and he was right. And his words were prophetic, unfortunately. Yep. And Jerry, if you wanted to, weigh in on that and just how we're using our veterans and our troops as kind of a scheme to shake down the taxpayers.
Well, there are so many. There's a fellow by the name of Smedrud or something like that, who was a Marine general.
Smedley Butler.
What's his name?
It was Smedley Butler.
Smedley Butler. And which he wrote, he said, war is a racket. And that's exactly what it is. Now, when you take a look at what can I do as an individual? Well, I really encompasses everybody you know and you touch. It's just whether or not you're willing to share with and talk with these people and be vigilant about making sure that people understand the truth. I'm going to give you my forecast. When I started RIP medical debt, nobody talked about healthcare debt. Nobody talked about medical debt. I guarantee you, which is why Occupy Wall Street was so important. I didn't even know about medical debt the way it was being treated, and I was a debt collector. But when I heard what was going on and how it was going on, and I delved into what it was all about, changed my mind, changed my profession, walked in Occupy Wall Street as a debt collector, walked out as a debt forgiver.
There you
It
go.
can happen. It can
Yeah.
happen. So here's the secret now. Persistence over resistance, number one. And there are 4 things that are going to prove to you that in the next, between now and 10 years from now, veterans will be treated and be made aware of more than anything than ever in their life because of people like you and me starting to become aware. And once you're aware and you're touched by something and you get educated, well, once you're aware and once you're touched and once you're educated, there's only one thing left: action. Whether it be feet on the street or you name it, you do it. Even better. Don't name
Yes.
it, do it.
And since we're joined by Ray McClendon here, who's going to take over at the top of the hour and give us the lowdown on election theft. We got 47 people with us. And thank you, Steve and Mike and everybody for making this possible. Jerry, you're a great guest. I want to tell you as a historian that the mistreatment, the maltreatment, the unconscionable bad things that are done to veterans that come back from wars is a historic phenomenon. You're jumping into debt here. If you read the literature after the Revolutionary War, these guys were treated terribly. You know, the guys who won Yorktown and Saratoga and got wounded. I mean, they were just treated like trash. Great heroes, you know, big parades coming home, and then, you know, off to the dust heap for you. The worst actually was in the Civil War. This is an amazing story. In the middle of the Civil War, you know, we're doing amputations. I mean, medical care in the middle of the Civil War was incredibly primitive. And in the middle of the Civil War, they started using morphine. You know, I'm sure Nancy knows about this as a doctor. Morphine came in pretty much into use in the middle of the Civil War. And what happened after the Civil War? You had a plague, a horrible national curse of morphine addiction. Because these vets who were treated medically during the Civil War with morphine got addicted. Nobody knew what was happening. You had a whole generation of dope addicts that came out of the Civil War. Nobody ever talks about that, you know. And World War I, the same thing, you know. And World War II, you know, thank God we had Franklin Roosevelt, and they were treated a little better. But Vietnam, total trash heap, horrible situation. And God knows, you know.
Well, this is the difference between June 6, 1944, when we landed in Normandy, and a year or so later declared victory in Europe. What made the difference for those folks when they came home versus the veterans who are returning home now is that they were welcomed home. They were given generous GI bills. They were given generous housing.
Right. Housing and education.
Yeah. And by the way, there weren't any jobs. So the smartest thing that the government did was to put them in school. And when they put them in school, they got smarter. And when they got smarter, they got out and ran businesses. And that's why everything grew so well during the 50s and the 60s. I know.
Yes. We had the world's best educated workforce after World War II. Now what do we got? You know, anyway, Tatanka Bricka, and then we're going to roll on out. This is an amazing hour, Jerry. Just absolutely, you know, irreplaceable. We're going to have you keep coming back. You're great.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Adios, everybody.
No, wait.
Jerry, I just want to thank you so much, and I will call you. I have an idea I want to follow up with you. It may help out. I just want to say also that we all know the story of the 2,000 to 3,000 veterans that showed up at Standing Rock, right? To make amends, went down on a knee to apologize for their role in what happened to veterans. And that was the thing that got Obama to shut the pipeline down. It turned out, you know, when Trump came in, everything restarted. The oil is still flowing under the Missouri River, despite everything they've done legally and everything. It's still happening. But what I want to say is the action that they did is the action that all of us need. We need to find a national campaign for all of us to start there, all of us, to make amends for that and then go on to slavery, because the gathering of us together and the ending of the endless wars will be predicated on us taking responsibility, you know, for what we're doing, because what's playing out in Ukraine and what's playing out in Gaza is just a repeat of the colonization that happened to us and that we repeated. We all know Hitler's idea for the death camps came from how the US government set up reservations for the native people, etc. So we have, being born at this time, we have an opportunity to take responsibility for our history, and out of that, you know, join the citizens of humans, and whatever happens to this nation will be done in a good way. It may not even end up as a nation in the future, who the heck knows? But if we're going to have the survival of the human race and the survival of a planet that can still generate life, we need to integrate that action along with everything else we do. That's all I'll say now.
Thank you. Thank you, Tatanka. Thank you. Paul Newman's got a split. Thank you very much, Paul, for being with us. Jerry, you're great. It's really great. We got another great guy to take the torch here. Ray McClendon's with us. If you want to stick with us, and we're going to go now a deep dive. That was an amazing session. Anybody wants to get in touch with Jerry Ashton, write me directly or look in the chat, and we will definitely continue this theme on retiring medical and other debts. Thank you for that, Tatanka. Okay, we're going to switch over now. And this, maybe Steve, if you want to break the tape or whatever, we want to be offering Ray's presentation as a renewable videotape and link. And what Ray says to us now is going to be transcribed and be part of the guidebook that we're trying to produce within the next week or two for grassroots organizing in the United States in the coming election. The People's Guide to Grassroots Election Organizing 2024, and Ray is a big part of that. So Ray is in Georgia, has a new organization, and has been a pioneer in election protection. Been with us many, many times before. And Ray, what we're going to start with is the horrendous wave of anti-voter legislation that's coming down in Georgia and around the country. So if you could just give yourself a brief introduction. We got 45 people and we're live, and this will, of course, be rebroadcast and provide a big part of the literature. So if you'll jump on in, Ray, the forum is yours.
Sure, thanks. And hello to everybody. And this is a subject that we've covered many times, but I wanted to step back a little and let's give it the strategic context that it needs. And we know that this really all started to be reversed with Shelby County decision back in 2013, where the pre-clearance provisions were stripped away because we had a court that had said that all of that discrimination, all of the voter suppression that had occurred for decades, for almost a century across the South, was now over. And with that, the states that had previously been a part of pre-clearance began to systematically to take steps to turn back the clock. And we've seen more and more ingenious ways of doing that over the last 11 years. SB 202, many of you will remember, was one of the major voter suppression laws in the United States, right here in Georgia. That was a model that many provisions of which were utilized in other legislation across the country. That legislation went so far, as you will recall, to penalize providing water and snacks to people who were in long lines to vote out in the Georgia hot sun. It had a number of other provisions, though, that were not as salacious, so to speak, regarding voter purges. Now, voter purges had been masterminded by a Secretary of State by the name of Kemp. When he was Secretary of State, he purged several 100,000 voters, which gave him, in effect, the ability to be the referee going into his own gubernatorial race in his first race against Stacey Abrams. Since the rise of Trumpism and MAGA, we've now seen election denialism take on a whole new level in not only SB 202 and the ability to do voter purges, to restrict drop boxes, restrict absentee ballots. But there are several other components that I want to stress now that we need to be prepared for going into this election. Ray Lutz and some of the other guys are going to talk to you about what's going on in election protection and election integrity with respect to the ballots. And that's some great work. There are a couple of other pillars, though, to election integrity that we need to focus our attention on. Going back to the voter purges that I alluded to, number one, the new bill from this year that Kemp just signed last week, SB 189, affectionately known as the Franken bill, which is the equivalent of Frankenstein for voting rights, because it just cobbled together all bits and pieces of all MAGA election denying conspiracies into one bill that passed in the dead of night, was signed by the governor, and it has some more draconian components to it. One of the things is that it will make it easier than even SB 202 for individual citizens to contest the voting status of other citizens. And they have come up with a term, essentially, that if certain components of addresses, inaccuracies in or inconsistencies in the way the names are stated, or middle initials and so forth, that can constitute probable cause for an election challenge. So these MAGA vigilantes are already scheming on how they will use this bill that they lobbied for in order to go after voters in the major counties, which are predominantly Democratic, such as Fulton County and DeKalb County. In the last election, we had 6 people, count them, 6 people that were responsible for 89,000 voter challenges. 6 people. And those were all right-wing MAGA conspiracy election deniers. We anticipate that this will continue. They have made it easier for them to commit the challenges, and this will be a big fight for us going into the fall. Now, the good thing is that we have local election boards in both Fulton and DeKalb that are sophisticated, that have sound legal counsel, and they will be able to fight those. But in the smaller counties that don't have the same expertise, any of these challenges could be a substantial voter suppression mechanism that's going to cause some harm. So that's one leg of the stool, the vigilante attempts toward voter suppression by purging voters. The second part is just as insidious and is not getting quite the headlines, but will become more of a headline item as we get into the fall is the interesting part of SB 189 is called hovering. What hovering means is that poll monitors will be allowed to get even closer to observe the precinct workers during their work. So they're going to have more and more of these monitors that are going to be in a position that could potentially intimidate precinct workers. In addition to all of the physical threats of violence that have occurred, it's already difficult enough to find poll workers, and this is just going to be another annoyance on top. This also will have the impact as we get up to the election of potentially being a galvanizing force to bring out the MAGA mobs that we know showed up on election night and in the days after the election in several major counties and cities like Maricopa and Detroit. So we see this all as a part of a coordinated effort that will be done to threaten, cajole, intimidate election workers and election boards. So a part of all of that is the backdrop that I wanted to give out initially, and to let everyone know that there are some components that are going to be a wave coming up that already is a strategy on the part of the MAGA family on how they intend to threaten, intimidate, to set up the denial of any result that does not favor Donald Trump. So we need to be prepared for these things. We're already beginning to organize here, as an example, in Georgia. We're around these two components, and I'll be happy to talk more about it, but I'm going to start there as an opening statement. Any questions, Harvey or anybody?
Well, we're also joined by John Brakey and Steve Rosenfeld. You know, I mean, what you're telling us here is basically we're looking at the apocalypse. We really gonna have to mobilize like absolute crazy to deal with this stuff. And thank God you're sounding the alarm. It's getting no press at all at this point in time. You know, 4 years ago we had Greg and well, I will say one thing real quick. I see Steve, you're in a car, you're not driving. We allow people to talk to us from their cars, but not if they're driving. So, but this is devastating stuff. This is actually why our call started going, by the way. This is what got us started in 2020. And now you are, and you and Andrea Miller were the real catalysts for getting these calls going. So we're seeing somebody's feet, John Brakey's camera there. So Steve Rosenfeld, you heard, I think, most of what Ray said about the anti participation bills and the steps that the MAGA movement, which is nonpartisan, is taking to prevent people from voting. And can you chime in with more of a national perspective of how this is happening in other states?
Yes. Can you hear me? Am I clear?
Yeah, you're good. You're
okay,
good.
Great. Nice to see you.
I will say that a stationary car often makes a good sound studio. So go right ahead.
Well, so what I have reported on and noticed, which is a big change from 2020, and it's occurred incrementally over the past 2 years, is what Ray is talking about is really the tip of the iceberg. And let me be more specific. What's happened is after 2020, a lot of Trump supporters were very disappointed, and they generally grabbed onto cliches. And the cliches have been around for a long time. They're fabricating voters, they're forging ballots, they're hacking the machines. Well, since then, the election official establishment has decided that they don't want to engage with these folks at all. They don't want to teach them. They don't want to educate them. They think that they're unreachable. So what's happened is, in these Republican election integrity circles, people have discovered the steps and the stages and the technologies that are used in running elections. And they're teaching themselves about what they think can go wrong at every step of the way. And every step of the way is now targeted with some kind of conspiratorial, this failure could happen here, this failure could happen there. And if you go on the Telegram channel, if you go on Telegram, which is a platform favored by the Trumpers, and go to the election education channel, you'll see people who really were no different, Harvey, than you or I were after Ohio in 2004. But what happens is, in today's culture, they will look at something that might not be clear in the election process, and they'll dig into some minutia, and then at a certain point, they'll just go south, and they'll just assume the worst is going to happen. So what's happening with what Ray is talking about is sort of the entry point of this spectrum of steps and stages that take you from the starting line, which is to be a registered qualified voter, all the way through to the end when the results are officially certified, and then maybe there are recounts, and then maybe there are court challenges. So the cliche that's in the circles that animates these mass voter challenges is not just that Democrats are forging and election officials are colluding with them to have fake voter rolls, fake illegal voters on voter rolls. They believe that the voter rolls are kept inflated so that people can magically monitor who is voting, and at the very last minute, ballots can be cast in the names of people who are, have not voted. And they believe that the Democrats and election officials are in on this. And even though there are lots of checks and balances along the way, they believe that the biggest vector for this is voting by mail, with mailed out ballots. So what you're seeing with Ray is these front end attempts to throw up stop signs, mass challenges. And in the bill that was just signed by the governor in Georgia, for example, you have it's going to challenge the federal National Voter Registration Act, which says you can't alter a voter registration roll 90 days before an election. Well, they have a shorter deadline. That's going to court. That causes confusion. That allows this narrative, because when there's a court action, it's a rationale to say in the right-wing media, it's in court, it must be real. And it beats the drum on there's fake voters, there's fraudulent voters, there's fabrication of ballots and all that sort of stuff. But as you get closer to the finish line, what you'll see and you'll hear is, wait a second, we can't trust that the drop boxes are not unmonitored. It just goes like that movie 2000 Mules. Or then it gets to, well, they're forging signatures, as they're checking the envelopes. And then it gets inside, well, like even if election officials and poll workers are being honest, something is happening magically electronically that no one can see. And you get all these sky is falling scenarios that are articles of faith. And that's the environment we're in. And that's really different from 2020, because what's happened is, with the exception of folks like on your calls, Harvey, very few people on the left or the center left, they've surrendered the language of transparency to the Trumpers. But the Trumpers don't really know how complicated election systems are. They don't really know they're not saying what scales or doesn't scale publicly. So, this is the environment, and it's very different than what it was in 2020, because people are weaponizing details where they don't understand the full implications of what that all is. And And I think what Ray is talking about there is sort of, it's the front end of it. It's why someone like Christina Bobb, who was, a TV reporter for a pro-Trump channel and is a lawyer, and then got involved with working with Rudy Giuliani behind the scenes and was recently indicted for the fake elector scheme in Arizona. She's now the head of election integrity for the RNC. So that's not an accident. There's sort of a belief that unless we win, everything is rigged against us. And it's not just by Democrats, but it's by officials. And then you have all these people with these narrative threads saying, oh, well, this is magically happening invisibly against us over here and over there. And that's the environment we're in.
Wow. Boy, Steve, mind-boggling. Let's go to Mike Hurst, Tatanka Bricka, and Steve Kaiser. This is the nitty-gritty of what we've been doing at GREEP for the last 5 years. That's how it started. And here we are, deja vu all over again. We started in April of 2020 to deal with just these issues. And thankfully, something good happened, and now it's back in spades. Mike Hirsch?
Yeah, I want to very quickly thank you, Steve, for raising these points. And I think that you make a very interesting and accurate observation saying that the Democratic Party and the mainstream corporatist Democrats have given up or ceded the argument for transparent elections to the MAGA right. And I would argue that unfortunately, they've never been steadfastly in support of transparency, whether it was the Hillary Clinton people refusing to challenge in Wisconsin, or the John Kerry team refusing to challenge in Ohio, where a lot of us worked back in 2004 and raised very troubling concerns where there was pretty clear evidence of wholesale vote shifting and various other methodologies. And John Kerry and his campaign announced in the morning that they were going to challenge, and actually a friend of mine sent in money to help pay for that, and then they folded. And I think that that was part of a mainstream Democratic aversion to contesting elections, which has lasted for, at least since then and to this day. Yeah. And I think I think it's shameful that you have people like Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, calling for hand-counted paper ballots, which is very close to what we want here, where we also want them to be scanned so they can be more easily audited. But unless we have hand-counted paper ballots that the voter can read, and it's not some kind of a QR code or some other scrambled, undecipherable thing, we don't know going in, from the very point of the vote, that the ballots are inputted into the system accurately. But I want to pivot now to something that Ray has raised previously, and that has to do with further along, and Steve, like you were mentioning, the methodology of counting and recording the votes. Ray has called our attention to plans that, I'd like to say it's a clandestine conspiracy, but it's right out in the open. Steve Bannon and his acolytes are recruiting people to intimidate the nonpartisan election officials. They've from Trump all the way on down, MAGA has made life miserable, especially for women of color, but all election officials who already are overworked, underpaid, and hard to recruit. And Ray has mentioned that there's a concerted effort to target the vote counting strategically, to wait until Trump is ahead as the in-person election day votes come in. And this happened in 2020 when Trump was ahead, but then all of the early votes and mail-in ballots get counted afterward. And that's where Trump lost his lead. And he implied, Steve, as you mentioned, a lot of people believe that there was, what did Trump call it, manufactured votes? So Ray, I would love
you're referring to the red mirage. where
Exactly, the
Yeah.
redshift that's temporary, where the in-person election day votes come in, and they're largely Republican because Trump has told his supporters not to vote early, not to vote by mail. And Ray, if you could just outline for us that threat, the ongoing threat to election officials, doxing them and targeting them for abuses.
Well, there's no question. We've lost a ton of seasoned veteran election workers who just don't want the hassle. They do not want to go through what Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss have endured, and many others who have gone unnamed, both volunteers, low-level workers, as well as local election board officials. Remember that the local election boards are the lifeblood of this process. This is not a state-run process in most states. It's run by local election officials. And so there is a strategic effort underway to put in place in locales across the country a cadre, a mob of people prepared to be mobilized at the time of critical times in the voting process in order to up the ante of intimidation and threats to both the precinct workers as well as the local election boards. Now, how do we know this is going on? It's a part of Bannon's playbook that he has put out there. They've been working on this since 2020. There's no mistake that these vigilantes, the takeover of local election, not only local election boards, but the taking over of school boards, all are part of controlling local infrastructure to be mobilized for this purpose of calling a red mirage really a red wave that is being thwarted by fraudulent votes. So we've got to have a counterbalance. So I want to talk about the analysis of the problem, but I also want to talk about the counterbalance as we get into this conversation, because we need to start preparing for these, I call them local militias. These are going to be, it's almost like hand-to-hand combat on a local level. A general in Washington, D.C., or from a national party is not going to be what will stop this. We've got to have the same kind of local resistance prepared to go out in key counties and locales in order to thwart this if we're going to preserve the integrity of the elections.
We'll go into a little more of it while we got you on that, Ray, please. We got Tatanka, Steve Caruso, and Steve Kaiser, Steve Caruso, and Wendy. But I'm sure they all want to hear, what do you think is the antidote here? How do we face this down?
The antidote is mobilizing mass response and messaging, in my view. So on mobilizing mass response, we have got to massively begin to mobilize volunteers that are prepared to be poll monitors and local election board monitors. Now, poll monitors is very specific. There's training that goes on for that to actually have people that will counterbalance the MAGA poll monitors that will be hovering in these sites here in Georgia. So you want to make sure there's counterbalance so that they can report any threats, intimidation, anything going on against the MAGA folk who are looking for a conspiracy that's not there, number one. So we need those people to be trained right now. We need to find them and train them now so they'll be ready in the fall. Number two, we need to have messaging. You know, one of the things that Steve just talked about, and Mike Hirsch alluded to, is that the progressives have really ceded the messaging on election integrity to MAGA. Because when you really boil it down, these MAGA folks are really not concerned about election integrity. They are concerned about voter suppression. They want to suppress components of the vote, Black and brown people, urban people, and that's what they're doing on a consistent basis. In terms of election integrity, the cornerstone of democracy, that the more people that participate in democracy, the better democracy we will have. They are not championing that. They are attempting to suppress the vote so that they have minority rule. And we are not dealing with that as forcefully and as directly as we should. And therefore we get caught up in, well, we are all for election integrity. No, we're not. It's the progressives that are for the integrity of bringing more people into the tent. It's the direct intent of the Republicans, from study after study, from book after book that's been written, is to suppress the vote and deal with only a white minority that will maintain the power throughout all of the components of the voting process. So we need to do more to deal with that. We got some great minds, from Mark Elias to the folks at the Brennan Center and to others, but the messages are all over the place and they're not getting out to the people as to what's really going on between what the MAGA folks who are projecting integrity when they really are about suppression versus what progressives want, which is more people to be involved in the democratic process.
Wow, extremely well stated, as always, Ray. Tatanka, you want to jump in now? And then Steve Kaiser, Steve Caruso, and Wendy. And
Yeah, when I put my hand up, I just wanted to give it back to Ray. I've gotten a lot of what I wanted to hear. This will have to extend beyond this meeting. Maybe we need a whole meeting to deal with this, because it's not as simple as it used to be. Georgia is symptomatic and emblematic of what MAGA wants to do everywhere. Right, Ray?
Yes.
So I don't know if we need something preventative, something prophylactic all about this to wake people up. And it's going to involve a kind of messaging that maybe the best thing we can do here is not, my first thought is, a Georgia Freedom Summer, et cetera. But there are things that only you can do locally. If you need outside help, ask. But it sounds like the best thing is the messaging. If we can mobilize the entire creative, artistic community with all forms of messaging that basically get what you said in the last 2 minutes, that what the objective is the white supremacy and the MAGA thing, and people will recognize it if we point it out, because what Trump does and what he was trained by Roy Cohn to do is what you did, are doing, and are going to do to them, you project that out on them. Now they're going beyond the projection to actually act on it and to try to make that legal, to try to make voter integrity, which is actually voter suppression. And so I just want to start with that.
Okay, thank you. And
but I want to say that I want to be a part of a team of people. I don't know what you're referring to, Ray, with the great minds and stuff, but if there's something you want to participate in to bring resources I might have, or we might have here and around the country in the progressive community with the messaging, please do call on us.
Well, the first Monday of June, I guess it's 3 weeks away, we're going to have a national gathering on the Zoom call, on the GREEP call, for 2 hours to deal with. Hopefully, we will have the guidebook done by then. We have no choice, and we will deal with these issues that Ray and Andrea and Steve and John Brakey are dealing with in terms of the fabric of the vote. I mean, the 2024 election obviously is going to determine the fate of American democracy and of the human ability to survive on this planet. And we have no illusions here. Let me very briefly, Steve Kaiser, if you'll give me a minute.
Please, go ahead.
The election theft issue really came up in a whole new dimension in the 2000 election, where Governor Bush stripped the voter rolls and rigged the machines, as was shown by Greg Palast and what's her name? The woman who showed the election problem, the machine problem. Steve will remember.
Kathleen Harris.
Well, Catherine Harris was the problem, and on our side, we had a great woman who showed. But anyway, between the stripping the voter rolls and the manipulation,
Sluggo, was that Bev Harris?
Bev Harris, yes, she showed. So between Greg and Bev, we showed that they stripped the voter rolls and they rigged the machines in 2000. And again, as Steve mentioned, the Democrats did not come forward. Al Gore clearly won Florida. He did not do what was needed to do, and we wound up with George Bush in the White House as a minority president, and did all the horrible things. And then in 2004, we raised the issue in Ohio of the voter machines, and with Bob Fitrakis and Steve, we put forward the idea of hand-counted, hand-marked paper ballots, which was absolutely the right thing to do. And then along the way, John Brakey introduced us to digital scanning, which was the missing piece. Okay, and again, the Democrats did not step forward. In Columbus, we talked to all Kerry's people. Kerry himself was informed that that election had been stolen. The Democrats not only did nothing, they attacked us. The Republicans did not care that we showed how the election was stolen in Ohio 2004 or in Florida 2000. The Democrats come up with this ridiculous line: if you tell people the elections are stolen, they won't come out to vote. Come on, guys. What's the point of coming out to vote if they're going to steal it? And so finally, it came to a head again in 2016. We showed definitively in Wisconsin and in Michigan and in Pennsylvania that the Republicans had messed with the election. Hillary Clinton absolutely did nothing, turned around and attacked Jill Stein, who actually went into Michigan and got pneumonia and won a court decision to get a recount that the Democrats just blew off. Okay? It does have a good outcome in 2020 because of the campaigning we did. And this was strictly as a result of the election protection movement. More than 80% of the ballots in 2020 were on paper, hand-marked, and more or less hand-counted. But we had the introduction of the digital scanning in a lot of the places around the country. I don't know where. And the bottom line is you really can't do with the quantity of votes, 100 and how many million votes we have, you have to have digital scanning. And so in 2020, the only thing that saved that election was that, I hate to say it, was the COVID, because so many of the votes were mailed out, went out by mail, came back by mail, were on paper, were counted, and been digitally scanned. Had that not happened, the mantra that the election was stolen would have had no counterbalance. The only reason that we were able to show that 2020 was not stolen was because the votes came in by mail, they were on paper, and they were digitally scanned. And we had a 7 million vote margin, the biggest loss by any incumbent in American history, except for Jimmy Carter and Herbert Hoover. But that would not have happened had it not been for the election protection movement. Now things are on another level. And, 2024, we're looking at a nightmare here. We may get a very substantial, 80, 90% of the votes on paper. We may get them digitally scanned, but as Ray has shown, and as Steve has shown, now they're going, behind the box here, behind the meter, and they're preventing people from voting in the first place. And this has been with us, all along, but now it's on a whole other level. And it's a nightmare. So that's where we're at. We know we've made the difference. We know what this is the root of these calls, and it's the root of the Georgia miracle, where GOTV with Ray and Andrea really worked. But we're up against something now that's really formidable, and I'm terrified. Frankly, if you're not terrified, you're not paying attention. So that's where we're at. Okay, Steve Kaiser, then Steve Caruso, Wendy Lynn. Steve Kaiser, you still with us? And we're joined by John Brakey as well. John, we'll give you a hand. We got 41 people with us, and this will, of course, be transcribed and reproduced. I don't know where Steve Kaiser went. Steve Kaiser?
He disappeared. If he wants to get on, raise your hand again, Steve Kaiser. John Brakey just had surgery, so I don't know if he's going to come on or not.
Oh, okay. Well,
prayers up for John. He's trying to relax, and may not be a good thing for you even to be talking, but
okay, go
Steve,
Steve and Wendy, and then we'll go back to Ray.
Go ahead, Wendy.
And Steve Rosenfeld. Steve Caruso, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just saying, John Brakey just had surgery.
Oh, okay. John, good luck. Our wishes are with you, and let's move on, Wendy, and then we'll go back to Ray and back to Steve Rosenfeld, please. Wendy.
Hey, thank you. You guys can hear me okay. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Sorry, I was just in the chat going with some really interesting points there. So a few things what Ray was saying. First, I wanted to address a couple of other tactics is the laws to suppress the votes. Like DeSantis in Florida just a few days ago signed another law that makes it so if you want to change parties, you have to do it in writing at the DMV, which could cause problems for anyone, really. And it's another thing that just makes people discouraged. They don't find out until it's too late. You can't register on registration or on voter day here. And it kind of, to me, it reminds me of one really big one that has a major effect a couple of years ago, and people don't know about this. You have to, if you change your address in Florida, you have to change your voter registration at the DMV when you change your address. Because if, say, a piece of mail gets sent back to the state, or they find out that you moved and you haven't done that, they purge you off the rolls. So when I was petitioning for abortion, when I would go into more low-income neighborhoods, people that you could tell are educated and engaged, that think they're registered, their petitions would come back as invalid because they were purged. And these are particularly in areas where it's high eviction rates or people can't afford and they move a lot. So that's another thing. And I want to credit, I think it's Dale Axelrod came up with the term, like election preservation, because then it's like, it just makes all of the ballot images, all of the auditing, just a part of the whole process from registration to final count preservation. And it's a way for laymen to understand. It's like what Ray Lutz is doing by doing these like videos where he debunks the process, because this is all a science and laymen don't understand, like they're just trusting one expert or another. So if we can open up the vocabulary and teach people what the whole process is about, how things actually are impacting election voter counts, undervotes, overvotes, all that stuff, then everyone can come together. But I think election preservation just really ties everything together, where it takes away this side of that side and what the interests are and the motives. And it just says this is part of it. And Ray, I wanted to say real quick, I did think of somebody else in Florida here that I'd like to link you with. His name's Michael Goldfarb, and he does a lot of work with trying to get people to be poll workers and precincts, and you work closely with Carolina, who couldn't be here. She's sick today, but she's running for a Democratic delegate in the state. So we'll talk more. And I'm so glad to see Stephen Rosenfeld and John Brakey and Susan Pinchon. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Wendy. Ray, so what's the solution here? How do we?
I'll give a
save
word.
The world?
Let's come back to Steve first, and then I'll comment after Steve, if he has
Steve
anything.
Rosenfeld, are you still with us? Are you? Did you drive away? No, there you are. Let's unmute you.
Actually, Harvey, there's no one problem and there's no one solution. There have to be a lot of targeted solutions, and I think people here are talking about them. You know, at every step, different things need to be done. Got to make sure there are no voter purges. Got to make sure that there's effective GOTV. Got to make sure there's effective messaging. Got to make sure that in the swing counties and the swing states, that when people drive up 6 pickup trucks and get out with bullhorns and get on the evening news, crazy stuff is happening, that the people who are showing up to cover that know what's real and what's not real. In a lot of cases, that's not the case. You know, I will just turn for a second because just so people can have an update on this. So after your call last week, with Ken Bennett and John, Ken said, I would like to be able to see if we can use this tool that John helped create, the ballot image cast vote record auditing election verification tool. So I went to Arizona to help John put together basically a demo so that Ken can have something to show other people. We met with him for several hours on Saturday, and the feedback basically was this. Maybe I can lean on a couple election directors in some of the counties that had some of the most controversial counties, which are Republican run, and he knows them.
Steve, you're breaking, you're in and out on us.
I think we lost Steve, unfortunately, just as he was getting right to the point. But I think what he was saying was that some of the Republicans are understanding the threat that MAGA poses to our democracy. And there are some good Republicans who are stepping up, like the guest we had last week. So I don't want to put words in Steve's mouth, but that's my interpretation. What do you think, Ray?
No, I agree. I agree. And let's understand that as Steve was alluding to, there are multiple components to this. Some are tactical, some are strategic. And for me, I'm always looking at the strategic. There are greater minds than mine that are out here that can deal with some of the tactical components of how do we deal with the ballots to make them more transparent and give people more confidence? How can we deal with the procedure of getting the ballots collected and tabulated and what kind of paper and all of that? I'm dealing with a bigger strategic issue that we've got to deal with here. And here's my example. The example is that MAGA lost 60 of 61 court cases, and the 61st case really didn't have any concrete outcome on any election. Yet they still, after all of that, could move forward with a message from their leader that indeed the election was stolen and that they needed to stop the steal by fomenting revolution and an insurrection on the United States. That mobilization, that civic engagement that they had represented in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th was so profound to me because just the day before we had the great runoff election victories in Georgia, and we couldn't even celebrate those a day because of this movement that was occurring. And I think that we need to have a counter movement, a resistance movement that is prepared for that, because that was just a dress rehearsal for what is to come in January of 2025 if Trump loses. You can rest assured that it will be the same thing, and we need to be preparing for a response that reflects the people who believe in the rule of law, believe in the orderly transfer of power, responding and with letting their voices be heard at the ballot box and in their civic engagement going forward. This is not a one-off. We thought after we won on January the 5th, we could all drink a glass of champagne, pat each other on the back, And then it didn't even take 24 hours, and we were looking at what was going on because we were not at the same level of engagement that the other side was. They didn't care about the facts. So that's one of the components. We need to mobilize. Certainly we care about the facts, but we can't get tripped up in having all the facts to recognize what is the most important. We know the general themes of what is to occur. We might not win every court case. There might be some glitches here and there, but we know that the integrity of these elections can be confirmed and that we will abide by the rule of law and by the outcome of the election. And we need to stand by that in ways that we have not in the past and be prepared for that going in. And so all of the things that I was talking about on the front end are in preparation for what is to occur once we are hopefully successful on election day in November, but recognizing that our civic engagement in the political arena must continue even after that day.
That's beautifully stated, Ray. And as I say, we're in a terrifying situation here. We are definitely looking at the potential for a coup d'état, one way or the other. Either they'll steal the election or they won't abide. Now the question is, what are the organizations? Steve, you may know this better than anybody. What are the organizations around the country that are working on this, that have some awareness, that has some clout, that we can pull in to a coalition that will turn this around, or at least build a wall that we don't that we can stop the fascist coup that we know is coming? Steve?
Well, I would say I think, as Ray said, you have to look to local organizations who actually have a knowledge of what might unfold in their state. I think the national groups have largely missed the big picture, little pictures. And so, for example, with John, we try to advance to
Ray, your
in
connection.
the
I'm sorry, Ray. Steve, your connection is terrible. If you would please just very briefly give us the headline, because we're not getting half of what you're saying.
Okay. All I'm saying is the national groups don't quite have the picture of what is going on locally, and that's where different responses and interventions are necessary. And maybe it's another conversation. I'm sorry. The transmission here, the signal's strong.
And let me just say, to Steve's point, he is absolutely right. Same thing going on with Get Out the Vote, with the national political action committees, with the Democratic Party, and why they don't fund local grassroots organizations. It's the same problem that you have in terms of having a local grassroots response to the growing MAGA threat that is the local monitoring, the local election boards, and the taking over of other local political institutions like local school boards. The Bannon strategy is working. It's at work, and there has been no consistent response to that. The groups like the ones that we have here in Team Unity could be a part of that militia as a part of the resistance, but we don't have the same kind of funding that the other side has. And so the same malady that we have for GOTV, we have it in this broader strategic political response to civic engagement.
Well, okay, you're 100% right. We have 6 months to the election. As Bill Clinton once said, 5 months is a lifetime in politics. We know what the problem is here, right? There's no mystery here. And so we have to mobilize. We got to get into the national groups, get the money, get the the organizational oomph to get the local groups as a network nationwide to deal with this. There's no excuse. We can see the train coming, and we've had 24 years of experience since 2000. So we got to do it. We have to mobilize the national groups, get the local groups going with Andrea and Ray and Breaky and however else we're going to do this. We have the template, and we got to turn it around. I mean, that's it. No excuses here. So on June 6th or June 3rd, I think it is, the first Monday in June, we will hopefully have a guidebook, and we need a game plan. But before that, and we got to get going here. We're out of time. Mike Hirsch, or Steve Caruso, and then Mike Hirsch.
Yeah, just like Jerry Ashton earlier, it all started with Occupy, and I think it's time the American people just said, we've had enough. We're not going to put up with this. I mean, the majority of the people are for the right thing, obviously, and that's the way it's been, even though the redistricting and everything has taken control of Congress. There's no control there. It's just chaos. It's obvious. Every once in a while, they might do something that makes it look like they're doing something, but so there's a group I belong to on Facebook called, it used to be, say, Occupy for rigged elections. Now it's called Occupy for safe elections. And I think no matter what talent you have, what anything you can do, if you're a keyboard warrior or whatever, everybody's got to pitch in, and it's the who's in Whoville. You raise your voice and make it known that we're done. And we got to move on as a nation and get over this tripping over the fallacy of some guy's lies in the back closet.
Well, but we know yes, that's right. 100% right, Steve. Everybody on this call is tied to various networks, and we have to network the networks and get this rolling here. And there's no excuse. Mike Hirsch.
Well, Steve is absolutely correct. And he was quoting more or less from the movie Network, where the guy stuck his head out the window and yelled, I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore. And I'll tell you what I'm mad as hell about, and what I hope we don't have to take anymore, are these high-paid, high-priced consultants that are currently running the Democratic Party. And I have a suspicion, and I think I'm right, that they're able to raise money more easily when Trump is in office than when he isn't. And I don't think they care if Trump wins or not. I think they might even prefer Trump winning. They sure act like it. And what I'm doing is calling upon the DNC and anybody who gives money to the DNC to say, I'm not going to give any money to the DNC anymore unless and until they fire all these consultants who do two things. They go on TV and schmooze about this and that and complain about how, Medicare for all won't work and peace is naive and dumb, and we need to pour all the money into the prison industrial, military industrial, healthcare industrial, every industrial complex there is, and we never have a dime or a nickel to rebuild our schools or to make sure people get fed. What I was going down the road just the other day, and I had to wait and get around a huge line of cars at a church. This was not on Sunday. This was a huge line of cars for people waiting to get into a food pantry at the church. And this is in Montgomery County, Maryland. It was one of the most wealthy counties in the country. We have a hunger epidemic. We have a housing epidemic. We have crises stacking up because, as Sluggo said, our elected officials are not listening to us. And that is why we have to work so hard to get people out to vote. Somebody said if they wanted us to vote, they would given us politicians to vote for. We have a crisis now, and it's a consultant-driven, greed-driven attitude where the Democratic Party too often says, well, where are people going to go? Who are they going to vote for? Are they going to vote for Trump? Well, they won't vote for Trump, but they'll stay home. And that's the problem. They're not doing anything to help Ray or Andrea or the people who are doing the work who actually care, because we're serving communities in need, desperate communities. That's where Trump came from. There wouldn't ever be support for Trump if our government did what it was supposed to do. And as Steve said, Republicans are even worse. If you look at the mess in the House, where they have a tiny majority in the House and they can't get anything done, and each new Speaker of the House is worse than the one before, more incompetent, and the people that they have now, the Republicans are scrambling. There's the Republican woman who gave that incoherent response to Biden's State of the Union. She came up with a brilliant idea of a national registry of pregnant women to make sure women don't get abortion care. This is ridiculous. What kind of country are we in? And I blame both of the major parties for not caring, not listening to people like Ray, not listening to people like us. We have to muscle up and save our country. There's nobody else who's going to do it. We can't rely on corporations. We can't allow the parties to run amok and to noodle around while the Titanic is hitting the iceberg. We've got to really muscle up. And thank you so much, Sluggo and Ray and everybody on this Zoom, because we all care. We all give a crap about what's happening to this country, whether the consultants do or not. Sluggo, you're on mute. Sluggo, you got to unmute yourself.
Very well stated, Mike. Thank you so much. I'm muting because I've got a bird out my window, which is great and makes a lot of noise. If you hear a bird chirping in the background, it's my house. So listen, we have to mobilize now. I mean, this is we know what the problem is. We know we're facing it. Hitler's marching down the street, and he's got his brown shirts, and they are called MAGA. And this is it. We're not, as Americans, we've been spoiled. We haven't been used to facing a fascist coup, but we did get a taste on January 6th, and now it's 4 years later. And Steve Bannon, the great mastermind, is a smart guy, a horrible human being, but there he is, and he's smart enough to know history and to know how to do what he wants to do. And I will say also this, and on day one of the Trump presidency, he will kill all the Palestinians. And on day two of the Trump presidency, he'll kill all the Jews. So, we need to face that reality. John Brakey, we see your feet here. I'm not sure that's what we want to see.
You don't want to see my face. I can tell you that right now.
Well, then turn off the video. Turn off the video. We know who you are, and we know you. You look exactly. We have met you. John Brakey. Everybody looks exactly like Cary Grant, and John, tell us what you want to say, and we hope you're okay.
I just want to agree with the conversation you're having right now, because the Democratic Party has failed us. They've isolated us. The worst thing, I used to be a psychotherapist. And, I know that if I'm going to get through to people, I have to win their hearts and minds, okay? And that fraud, I was assaulted twice, but I was able to get to thousands of people because thousands went through there and help be able to have honest dialogue respectfully done. But ignoring people forces them into grifter lands, and the grifter can talk with authority because there's nobody challenging them. They will not do press conferences, okay? And so we have become so isolated. I am concerned about, let's face it, we've only had one civil war in this country. And when it happened, what started it? It was an election, okay? And I advise everybody, go see that movie, Civil War, and what 5 journalists went through. It's not a political movie. It shows you how it could happen. And you bring your own politics to the movie. And it's a tremendous movie because we need to take this seriously. And I'm sorry that Steve didn't have a bigger channel, because Steve did a wonderful job coming in, working with me for 5 days on a hyper focus, okay? If you spend 5 days with me in a hyper focus, you should leave with a t-shirt saying, I survived John Brakey. and hyper-focus.
All right.
Because, you know, I really crammed them with everything I know. And Steve helped me put a PowerPoint together that is second to none, describe the problems. And
All
there's
right,
really
so listen,
4 or 5
next
PowerPoints
week,
there.
next week, John, we will look at the PowerPoint. Next week, we're gonna have another hour on this. Everybody needs to, we'll have an hour
Yes.
on energy. And then everybody needs to come with networks that they're tied into that we can really expand the base here. I mean, we all know, you know, we're talking very powerfully. Ray's given us the red flag. We will have more explicit things available next week, and we will just keep at this. But we can't keep wringing our hands here. We have a plan. We know all about this. You know, we have 24 years since 2000 when there was a coup d'état. I mean, there's no doubt that putting George W. Bush in the White House was a coup d'état. He did not win that election. And there was a violent attack. You know, we talk about January 6th is a violent attack on the Capitol that failed. In 2000, there was a violent attack on the voting boards in Florida, and they won. It was a violent coup d'état in the United States in the year 2000. And so in that time, we've had 24 years to figure out what we have to do with elections. We've had people like Ray and Andrea on the ground, and now there's no excuse. We've got 6 months to save this country, and we don't have to keep saying that.
All I can say is that I'm excited. I don't have cancer. That was a concern. I kept it secret. They went in. I was in surgery for 2.5 hours.
Oh my God.
And you know, I just love that Michael Jackson juice. You know, I woke up, wow, that feels good, and I don't got cancer. You know, it was the first message I wanted to hear. And you know, in the last since July, I've become more extremely focused. I quit drinking. I've lost close to 40 pounds. I'm getting in fighting shape. We are going to make an impact, and we're going to run a campaign to show the American people that the problems in elections are complicated, but the solution is simple. It's called transparency. And what is transparency? It's the currency of trust. And without that trust, our democracy is dying in darkness, and we're heading to an election that's going to trigger violence. And it will be by crazy people who have gone down a rabbit hole that we've ignored and allowed them to be empowered by Trump.
Well, listen, you know, this won't be the first election where there's been violence. You know, violence has been a staple of American elections for a couple hundred years. But, you know, we as I say, we're forewarned, and we're not advocating weapons. There is no doubt that we have had an impact. You and Ken Bennett and the others in Arizona made the difference in that state. We have, thanks to what we've been doing since 2004 in Ohio, we do have a game plan. We have a blueprint for how you can run a successful election. We saw it in 2020, and we saw the Georgia miracle, and we know what we can do, and we know what we have to do. So let's.
And we know with Abe that we will be able to go ahead on election night, take the 75% of the vote that is completed, run it through Abe, break it down by precinct.
Wait, you got to tell us, what is Abe?
We can combine, and we could have a canvas report, because these election officials still live in an optical scan world, and they don't really run their own elections. They're run by the vendors. And the vendors are not into teaching you everything because it's job security for them.
Okay. Well, we will have a guidebook. We will have a game plan. We'll have another meeting a week from today. We'll do a full hour on this, and we'll do a full hour on energy. But between the two, we know what's happening. Look, when we first started fighting nuclear power, we said, you know, they asked us how we get the energy. We said wind and solar. We had no idea what we were talking about. we were just, it was just a bunch of BS. And look, it happened. It really happened. And we know that the planet will not survive more nuclear power or fossil fuels. So at the same
time, in closing on my part, I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank you. I also
Okay.
want to thank Steve Rosenfeld for coming in,
We
spending
want to
5
thank
days with
Ray
me.
McClendon's got to go too, John. So
And
everybody,
Susan
actually,
Pinshaw, thank you.
thank you,
Ellen
Ray.
Tyson.
Next week, Ray. Next week, pick an hour. Let me know you want to go first or second, and we'll do. And hopefully, we'll have Andrea with us, and hopefully, we'll have the guidebook ready to roll. We will meet Thursday, by the way, Ray, to talk about it. Okay. Thank you, Ray McClendon. Thank you, John Brakey. We're almost out of time here. John, we hope your surgery was successful. We thank you so much for signing in with us despite it. I think you're the first one to be on the call from a hospital room. But we're glad you joined us and glad you did what you're doing. Thank you, Steve Rosenfeld. Also, Mike Hirsch, you want to jump in here before we sign off?
Absolutely. How about that John Brakey? Even surgery can't slow him down at all. The man is incredible. Thank you so much, John, for your energy and your commitment. You are absolutely an inspiration, and so glad to hear that positive
What you
news.
said earlier was remarkable, and
Well,
thank you, because this will only work if we become a team and we get focused and
Yeah,
make it happen.
I mean, glad that, and thank you for
Inspire
that.
people.
Glad to have Camilla Reese with us on the call. And everybody, get your networks fired up. We've got 6 months to save this country. And I think we've seen enough of Donald Trump and enough of Steve Bannon to know, enough of Joe Biden to know that we're really up against it here, but we know what to do. And there's no excuse for not doing it. Okay.
I want to mention Wendy raised the difficulty in Florida where they're trying to make it harder for people to even vote in the primaries. And I just want to call out, we're not advocating voting for one person or another. This is a nonpartisan, non-for-profit venture. But there are primaries going on in Maryland tomorrow. There are primaries going on in our neighboring state of West Virginia. If you're in those states or any other states with primaries, get involved. I'm not telling you who to vote for, Republican, Democrat, or whatever, but get involved in the primaries. By election day, the choices are already made. So get involved, get involved, get involved. And as Ray was saying, get involved in the election, in the counting and the administering of elections, from the primaries all the way to election day. We need all hands on deck. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Mike. We need everybody's networks now. Most of the people, many of the people here on these calls to talk, everybody, we're organizers. And this is what this call is about. This is an organization of organizers. And here we go. So Wendy, I'll give you the last word. Anybody else want to jump in? We're going to sign off. This was pretty powerful stuff. Go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll piggyback on a little bit on what Mike said, but I do want to say thank you, Sluggo, for sounding the alarm, because there's so many alarm bells ringing right now on the planet that it's hard to even decipher or process it all. And the clock is speeding. We're already halfway through the year. So the faster the universe expands, the faster it expands. So it is really, really important because of the consequences. And what Mike was saying about the down ballot races, it's so true. And we were talking about it in the chat before, if everybody wants to save their chat for different things. The progressive, or I'll say the non-establishment candidates, they're the ones that, if we want to change the House and we want to change the Senate, which honestly collectively has almost more power than the POTUS. So we need to make sure that we support whoever the non-establishment, non-corporate funded candidates are that are willing to work, with the Liz Cheneys and the Mike Pences to preserve integrity of government and the Constitution and America as we know it. And also ballot amendments. Sometimes it's if people are too pissed off at what's going on to want to vote for the POTUS or whatever else, just remind them that the down ballot races like education and judges, all of these laws are getting passed because we have these horrible judges that can actually be voted out, especially with abortion issues and such. So make sure you're following the ballot amendments in your state. Yeah, Holly Mosher, she's been putting stuff in the chat that's been good and related to this. So follow the movie that she's doing and check it out. But yeah, just stay engaged, and thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here and doing the work. Appreciate you guys. Love you.
Okay, you guys. Forewarned is forearmed. There's no mystery here. So, or as we used to say in the 60s, history's no mystery, blast the past. But I think we'll have to blast the future now. Steve Scalmanini, did you want to jump in here before we go? Steve Scalmanini?
Yeah, just quick question. The chat is not copyable this meeting today. So can somebody get it and put it out there where?
Yeah, put your email address in there. You can send it to me directly, direct message. We've got it fixed, hopefully, and there's a mistake made at some point. So,
okay, thank you.
yeah.
All right,
You
and
wanna
thank
put-
you. Thank you,
Go
Steve, for engineering. And this is pretty sobering, guys. Let's rock and roll, as they say, and we'll see everybody next week. Same time, bring your networks now. We don't need to bring our hands anymore about how bad it is. What we're up against there's no mystery here. So, okay. No nukes, no more stolen elections. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much, everybody.
Networks over Nazis and nukes.
There you go.
Anybody
care.
else want to put their email in there? Do it now or before I close the meeting. Otherwise, it's gone. Thank
Give you a
you.
minute, put your email in there. And spread the
Oh.
word about the calls, by the way. I know a lot of you get multiple messages about the calls. That's just how it goes. But what you need to do is forward the message about these calls, and let's really build the networks. Thank you. And thank you to Tonka for being such a great chair at KPFK. We are saving the Pacifica Network, by the way, and we will have a session on Pacifica. There's an election coming up. Everybody's going to need to join, please, the Pacifica Radio Network, $25 so you can join and you have a vote. We'll deal with that. I'm going to start to post that regularly. I think the deadline is going to be June 30th to vote, to join. So everybody's going to need to join the Pacifica Network. And we need to support these GREEP calls, and we will make the difference. That's the point of being an activist. It's not just to wring your hands in public and feel good about it, to get everything done. And that's what we've done. Thank you again. No nukes, everybody.